Welcome back to Bible 101, Lesson 4, Wisdom for a People. This is a part of the Old Testament that really doesn't have a timeline, doesn't have a time frame. These are some books that really we're not sure exactly when they all would have been written and may have been written over a long period of time. But these books provide wisdom for the people of Israel. There are 5 books, if you notice on your screen, 5 books of the Old Testament that offer wisdom for Israel. They are Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. These books generally come in the form of poetry. It's not really like our poetry, though. Our poetry, we tend to think rhymes, roses are red, violets are blue, I love you, Scooby-Dooby-Doo, something crazy like that. I know I'm not much of a poet. But that's really not how their poems worked. They had different structures to them. One of those structures, for instance, is a parallel structure. So the psalmist or the poet would write one thing in one line and in the very next line say something that was almost exactly the same. So we have an example here in Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. For he founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. Well, if you notice the last 2 lines, he founded it on the seas is paralleled by and established it on the waters. Of course, there's other forms too. That's just one example. Some forms that are elaborative, where the poet or the writer will elaborate. He'll say something and then elaborate and elaborate and elaborate. You get that in Psalm chapter 1. Psalm chapter 1 also shows opposing ideas. It's not this, but it's that. So that's another form of poetry for the Hebrew people. Or they'll often use similes, and that'll be their form of poetry. So they have different forms than we do when we think about poetry. But the poetry of Israel, very much like a lot of our poetry, expresses the joy and the struggles of life. And it finds a way to say things in words to try to express emotions that sometimes we have a hard time expressing. So because they express things, in emotions, and trying to express emotions, we really not always should take them too literally. If you think about some of our songs, some of you might remember the song, I'm going to love you until the 12th of never. Well, when is the 12th of never? There's no such thing. Or there's a song that's popular for younger people, I love you like a love song baby. Well, what does that mean? If you take those things literally, you realize, of course, they can't be taken that way. But songs are not meant to be taken that way. Poetry is not meant to be taken that way. So we think, for instance, of Psalm chapter 22. Many bulls surround me, strong bulls of Bashan encircle me. Roaring lions that tear their prey open their mouths wide against me. Well, does he really think, is he really saying that there are bulls around him? Or is that just how he feels? This is what poetry does, is expresses our feelings. So the first book we want to look at is the book of Job, the Old Testament book of Job. Have you ever wondered, why is it that bad things happen to good people? Well, I think everybody wrestles with that question, with that problem. This is what Job tries to address. We're not really sure when the book of Job took place. Some people think it really didn't actually take place at all. Christians are not necessarily in agreement about this. But the book of Job tells a story of dealing with this very problem here. So, in your book and on the screen, the book of Job addresses the question, why do bad things happen to good people? It begins telling us about this man named Job and what a righteous person this man was. Job chapter 1. In the land of Uz there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. Well, as the story goes on, Satan encounters God, and God says, what have you been up to? And Satan says, I've been wandering around the world. And God says, have you considered my servant Job? There is nobody like him, no one righteous like him. And Satan says, yeah, but it's because you take care of him. If, in fact, you removed all the stuff from him, you took everything away from him, he would curse you to your face. And God says, no, he wouldn't. Satan says, oh, yes, he would. And God says, well, you can have him, but you can't kill him. And so we find out, as you see in your book and on the screen, Satan took most everything from Job, including his health. Well, his wife encouraged him to just curse God and die. Get this over with. Terrible things have been happening to you. He refused to do that. He said, we're not going to accept good things from God and not bad things. But he tried to figure out why are things going on. And so he cries out to God throughout the book. Here in Job chapter 6, you hear him doing this. Chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, and then verses 8 and 9. If only my anguish could be weighed and all my misery be placed on the scales. Oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant what I hope for, that God would be willing to crush me, to let loose his hand and cut off my life. And so this book is just filled with questions. Job questioning God, and why are bad things happening to me? Well, his friends come to try to help him out and answer this question, but they keep all telling him the same thing in different ways. And basically what they're telling him is, you know what the problem here is, Job? The problem is you've sinned. And because you've sinned, bad things are happening to you. And Job kept coming back at them. I have not sinned. I have not done anything wrong. And a different friend would step up and say, yes, you've sinned. And Job would say, no, I haven't. And they would say, yes, you have. And this bantering goes on back and forth throughout the book. Finally, in your book and on the screen, God responded to Job's questions with questions of his own. We hear this in Job chapter 38. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? Well, as a result of God's questions, Job realized there is much more going on in the world that he knew. And so Job praises God, but in fact, at the end of the book, God gives Job back many more things than he had to begin with. So now we come to the book of Psalms in the Old Testament. Psalms are written by various authors. David is one of the most famous that we know about, but also Moses wrote some of these Psalms. But there's some other people that are not as well known. Asaph, for example, wrote some of these Psalms, and a man by the name of Ethan the Ezrahite, whether we wouldn't otherwise know anything about this person. These books, though, offer us something different. As you see on your screen, these books offer words spoken to God, while other books of the Bible are words spoken from God. And so it's in that way, Psalms is really different than the rest of the Bible. There's several types of Psalms you can see on your screen. There are praise Psalms, as you'll find in Psalm 117. Lament or complaint Psalms, as you'll find in Psalm 10. Instruction Psalms, like Psalm chapter 1. Or confession Psalms, as you'll find in Psalm chapter 51. Of course, the most well-known Psalm is the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want anything. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He restores my soul. A lot of people love this psalm because it is a very comforting psalm for them in their lives when things are difficult for them. Some folks seem to think it seems odd for God to inspire us with words that we would then turn around and speak to Him. But what God has done is inspired writers to show us how to speak to God, how to pray to God, and how to praise God, and to show us how to express our feelings, because that's what, again, Psalms do. They express feelings towards God. Well, the book of Psalms was a hymn book for Israel. These were the songs that they would sing when they would gather in their assembly. So it was the hymn book of Israel. And just like we remember a lot of songs like we hear on the radio or something like that, the same was true for the people of Israel. They heard these songs and they sang these songs so much that they became a part of their vocabulary and they could recite them very easily. So many times in the New Testament, the Psalms in part are quoted. And in fact, Jesus on the cross quotes from the 22nd Psalm, my God, why have you forsaken me?" There are 5 books of Psalms you can see on your screen here. Book 1 goes from 1 to 41, 2 from 42 to 72, 3 from 73 to 89, 4 from 90 to 106, and 5 from 107 to 150. So if you look at the very beginning of the book, right before Psalm 1, you'll see that it says Book 1. All right, now we come to the Old Testament book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is a collection of wise sayings. We have some of those in our country here in the United States, like a penny saved is a penny earned, right? And you can probably think of lots of sayings that you've heard people recite. And this is really what Proverbs is full of. And the idea is if you follow these in your life, they're going to help you to have a very successful life. You are going to end up being a very wise person. So close to the beginning of the book of Proverbs, we're told what these are for. Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 4. For giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. The idea is what you have is a young person who is at the crossroads of life. Which direction are they going to go? Are they going to follow the way of wisdom, or are they going to follow the way of foolishness? And so these proverbs are meant to give them instruction. A lot of them are very short statements so that they can live a wise and a very successful life. And parents would use these to try to train their children, although the proverbs are not always just for young people. The worst thing you can be in the book of Proverbs is a fool. Listen to some of these proverbs. The way of a fool seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions. As a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly. Well, you might feel like you know some of these folks, right, that have acted in this way. The foundation for all wisdom is to fear the Lord, which seems odd to a lot of folks because they think, how can you be afraid of God if God is so loving? But I love the quote by the Christian writer C.S. Lewis, who says, people who don't think that somebody can be good and you can be afraid of them have clearly never been to the dentist. Because the dentist is very good and is looking out for you, but there could be some pain that would come with this. And the same is true with God. He is good and He's loving and He's kind, but He's also very powerful. And so when we fear and when we respect God, this is the beginning of wisdom for us. The Proverbs offer wisdom that is generally true. These are general truths that you follow. It doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions to them, because there are exceptions to them. For example, one of the most well-known Proverbs is chapter 22 and verse 6. It says, start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. But in fact, many of us have known parents who have raised their children to be godly people and to follow God, and then they turned away when they became adults. So if this were always true, of course, then we have a problem. But they're not always true, but they are general truths. If you will do this, generally speaking, this will happen. Your children will be faithful to God as they get older. Now we come to the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is the book that deals with the basic questions of life, like, why am I here? What is my purpose? What am I doing on this planet? How can I be happy? Those are some important questions that most of us wrestle with in our lives, and these are the questions that Ecclesiastes is going to try to answer. Tradition says that King Solomon wrote this book. King Solomon had great wealth, and he engaged in all kinds of projects and tried to find all kinds of things to make him happy and make him feel good about himself, but he found that there was something missing. There was some kind of hole there that all these things he was doing was not quite filling. He tried to fill it with projects, with pleasures, with things. A lot of us try to fill our lives with more things as if that's going to give us meaning. And so we see, as you see on the screen here, he sought fulfillment in many things, but found them all meaningless. Here's what we hear from Ecclesiastes chapter 2. So I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish? Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil, into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So in the end, he concludes that life is totally meaningless without God. Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. And now we come to the last of the 5 books, which is the Song of Songs. Song of Songs is a love story between a husband and a wife. And so as you see on your screen and again in your book, this book confirms God's intention for love between a man and a woman and shows us that sexual love was designed by God and should not be thought of as something dirty. And so this speaks of this love between this husband and this wife, and it's often very descriptive and sometimes erotic. But this is how God designed us. We saw back in Genesis at the beginning. He created us to be sexual beings. All right, now let's turn to the lessons to be learned. First of all, lesson to be learned about God. God is sovereign. That is, He is the master of all. These books of wisdom repeat this theme throughout. Secondly, about God, praising God is akin to enjoying God. We think about maybe going and seeing a sunset at the ocean and just enjoying that and then telling other people about it. And that's a way we can express pleasure and express joy and praise it even. And so we express joy and pleasure and praise to God in this good thing that we experience with God. Secondly, lessons to be learned about humans. Ecclesiastes tells us that God has placed eternity in our hearts, so that there's this hole in our hearts that nothing else but God can fill. And secondly, we would do well to take advice from those who are older and who themselves have had the Lord shape their lives. Proverbs 13:20. Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. And so these are the lessons to be learned from the wisdom literature. We'll pick up with lesson 5 when we start talking about Jesus next time. Thank you.